Stephen Mead again, back with another Bullseye Guy podcast. Excited to have John on with us. I would say I knew John from when he was in Los Angeles, but just learned he has now moved to Austin, one of the many people transferring down there. So appreciate your time, John. Great to see you. Great backdrop. Everybody's rated now on their backdrops and stuff, but really appreciate your time. So typical, just give us a story. Give us the John background and introduction.
Thanks, Stephen. Well, you know how a lot of salespeople today, now more than ever in a virtual world, struggle not to be seen as a commodity. And so what I do is I'm the pitch whisperer. And they bring me in at the annual sales meetings now that are mostly virtual and teach salespeople how to turn a boring case study into a compelling case story. And when that happens, whoever tells the best story is the one that gets the business.
Right.
So my speaking and my online course based on better selling through storytelling allowed them to win more clients, but also put all of those stories from all the team together in one repository map. And so case stories now are helping companies break down silos between divisions.
And what was your background leading up to this? Because I know when you and I met, it was one of my events here in LA a while ago, and you were telling me about it. So give us a little background on what you've done and how it led you to this point.
Sure. I basically had three separate careers before I became a full-time speaker. I worked in Silicon Valley selling multi-million-dollar mainframe computers to big companies and had to really learn sales and competing against IBM back in the day. Then I had a career working for an ad agency, getting studios to let us create their commercials for movies coming out on home video. And that's really where I honed my storytelling skills. We could reinterpret a movie into a 30-second commercial that would make people go rent it if they didn't go see it in the theaters. And then I had a 15-year career at Condé Nast selling advertising for brands like GQ and Wired and Vanity Fair, and there's about 20 of them, to big companies like Lexus and Guess. And I also started my speaking career to my clients so that, let's say, a Land Rover would advertise in my upscale fashion magazine, W, and then I would give talks to their sales teams on how to not take rejection personally and how to sell the luxury market.
Yeah, don't take things personally. So a lot of selling, and I know you and I have talked about this, I love this aspect. It's not really fact-based, it's really more emotional-based. Yes. And so your background is selling hardware, which is a non-emotional commodity, into films and commercials. The arc of it's really emotional-based selling. And that's a lot of what I've seen your videos and talked to you with the pitch whisperer now. What are you doing? What's the program? What do people, when they first look at it, go, wow, John, that's amazing?
I think the big wow factor is that no matter how technical something is, you can turn it into a story and literally tug at people's heartstrings to get them to open their purse strings. So the first step is people buy emotionally, as you were saying, and back it up with logic. And when I was working with Olympus Medical, I said to them, what are you saying to doctors now? And they, oh, well, doc, this computer makes the surgeries go 30% faster. You want one? And I said, yeah, that's a left brain numbers thing.
Sure.
So now the story I helped them craft is, imagine how happy Dr. Higgins was down at Long Beach Memorial 6 months ago using our equipment, and he could go out to the patient's family in the waiting room. And if you've ever waited for somebody you love to come out of surgery, you know every minute feels like an hour. And he came out an hour earlier than expected and put them out of their waiting misery and said, good news, the scope showed they don't have cancer, they're going to be fine. And then turned to the Olympus rep and said, you know, that's why I became a doctor, for moments like this. Now that rep has a story to tell another doctor at another hospital. And here's the secret, Stephen. They see themselves in the story, and the doctors typically say, you know what, that's why I became a doctor. I want your equipment too.
Yeah, it's interesting, John, because to get to the point, in my background, I read 357 books, and every one of those little elements you did have 9 or 10 different micro psychological techniques in there. It's people make decisions emotionally, defend it logically, insert them in the story, pull it, so how did you end up through the program putting all of these elements together? And how does somebody use what you've learned to get better at either pitching, presenting, or selling?
Well, just to give a little behind the scenes curtain of why that story works, when I said it to Olympus, They said, wow, that gives us chills. Not only are we not telling stories, we never thought to include the patient's family as a character in the
The
story.
empathy side, yeah.
So you have to figure out who the right characters are. And then remember, you're not the hero of your story. Your client is, and you're the Sherpa helping them get there. So there's different genres of storytelling to learn, and anyone can learn how to tell a story. And I think once a company has me as a speaker and puts their entire team through the online course and gets to really hone in how to tell case stories, then they suddenly realize, oh, we're sharing all of our stories instead of the person only having their stories to talk about.
Yeah.
Because if you think of your mind like a jukebox, Stephen, and you push a number and a letter and a song comes out, you want to have as many stories as possible to tell, depending on who the right story is for that person you're talking to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, again, I love these kinds of conversations because I was in this space for so long. I trained 8,000 people, and step 2 of my 10-step bullseye is what's in it for you, what's in it for me.
Yes.
And that's what I think came out of your Olympus stories. The Olympus people, it sounds like, thought that the benefit was their product, not the customer being the actual person in the waiting room. Like, you have to figure out the other side of the story to make it important to the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you build the story points into a pitch when you work with somebody? Do you figure out the value proposition? Do you dissect the elements? Like, what do you do when you work with somebody to extract that? Because half the time they don't know their own story.
Correct. Well, I'll give you another story. I was working with Gensler, which is the world's largest architecture firm.
Architecture guys, yeah.
And they were up for $1 billion airport renovation to get to Pittsburgh. And they said, you know, we want you here for 2 days to coach us. We have an hour to convince them why they should pick us versus somebody else. And they had some beautiful slides of other work they'd done before and after. And typically they would show that and some designs they have for this project and hope that would do it. So instead, there's 4 elements to a story: the exposition, the who, what, where, when, like you're a journalist. The more you paint that picture with details, the better someone sees themselves in the story. You'll notice how I did that with Olympus. You knew the name of the doctor.
By the way, my sales training, I'm taking notes. So just so you know, every time I look down, for anybody else watching, always take notes when you get free content like this. It usually costs thousands. So go ahead.
And then you describe the problem. And so for you who likes to take notes, you might want to write this down. The better you describe somebody's problem through empathy, the better they think you have their solution.
Yeah.
So if you've been in their shoes or things like that, or you can tap in and describe unspoken problems, what keeps them up at night in your story, they're really leaning in. Then obviously your solution, and the secret to any good story, Stephen, is the resolution. What is life like after? Imagine if the Wizard of Oz stopped when Dorothy got in the balloon to go back to Kansas. There wouldn't have been that touching scene with her in bed saying, oh, you know, there's no place like home and all the That's the resolution. And most people don't think to have one. So the Gensler story, the resolution, by the way, in the Olympus story, is the doctor turning to the rep and saying, that's why I became a doctor, his purpose.
Yeah.
So Gensler, they told this story. 2 years ago, JetBlue at JFK hired us to renovate the terminal. One of the challenges we had during that multi-year project was you had to rip off all the tiles from 9 at night till 9 in the morning and rewire everything. And we had to get it done on time so the stores could open and not lose money. So we had all our vendors on call in case anything went wrong. And sure enough, at 2 in the morning, a fuse blew. We had that vendor to fix it there in 20 minutes. And at 8:59, the last tile went down and all the stores opened on time. And now a year later, sales are up 15% because we designed a place that pulls people in and keeps them spending more money. So you could see the exposition, you know where it is, the problem. The old way of doing this would have been we use critical thinking to anticipate problems, right? That doesn't,
Yeah.
So I showed it in the story. And a little bit of drama, 8:59, the last tile. The solution is the stores opened on time. The resolution that made them get the job was they could measure the before and after
Revenue
sales.
and income went up. People stayed around longer. Foot traffic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They go, they saw themselves in that story and said, that's the journey we want to go on.
And so when you're working with people, do you work primarily more with companies and sales forces, where I think this would be applicable, or CEOs and entrepreneurs, or even I would think, you know, there's a big market and appetite for public companies, you know, microcap. the storytelling component has interest at so many arc and levels. Where's your sweet spot? Where do you like to play?
My sweet spot that I love to play in is healthcare tech, like Olympus Medical.
Okay.
Or Honeywell's another example. They make a lot of equipment for hospitals and things and need to tell that story. And I've also worked with insurance companies and financial services. Anyone who has to pitch themselves against competitors, because I was in their shoes when I was selling advertising. So that's really my sweet spot.
And with what you're doing now, obviously, you know, COVID, we don't like to make excuses. COVID creates challenges and opportunities. Has it opened up the opportunity for you more? Because I think prior to COVID, this concept of virtual, and then we were so used to doing things in person and being on stage. Has COVID accelerated the business opportunity at all? Has it broadened the opportunity because we can do more virtual, or do you still miss that in-person tactile side?
Well, I definitely still miss the in-person tactile. I wrote a whole article about 5 things salespeople can't do right now. Can't take your clients to meals, can't meet them at conventions and trade shows, read the room. So I teach people you got to learn how to read the Zoom instead of the room.
Nice, yeah.
With social cues. But I am happy to say that it slowed down for a minute because we all had to figure out, could this be emotionally engaging? Could we get 200 people to pay attention and not be distracted? And there are some techniques, special effects, even playing music that allow me to make it very interactive and teach them now how to look and sound good on virtual calls. So now people are saying, listen, we need to have a meeting and it's going to be virtual. And so now they're looking for people who've got some virtual footage of themselves doing it, and not just what your equipment is again, but what's the audience response? Are they emotionally engaged? Are people laughing and
Right.
feeling?
Wow.
And it's fun because people are actually hungrier now than ever for emotional engagement because of the isolation. So when you can do it virtually, whether you have a special effect, as we talked about with me, I can have butterflies fly across.
I know, kid. Are we going to be able to show that? Yeah. Let's look at that.
But the trick is you have to put it in context. So my message has always been, when you get nervous, you get butterflies in your stomach. The goal is not to get those butterflies to go away, but to fly in formation, get the nervous energy out of your stomach and have it work for you. Well, now that message with that special effect, people lean in. When I tell a story of when I was a lifeguard and had to jump in and save a little girl, and she was underwater, 2 seconds, too long, people feel like they're really immersed in the story now because it's full screen. I can also talk.
Give us some more. These are great.
I talk about, we all get stressed out from time to time. And what if I rearranged the letters and stressed into something pleasant like desserts, because those 2 words are an anagram. And if you can rearrange your thoughts, like I just did those letters, then you have the power to change your thoughts. So you see, all the special effects are still tied to a message. Yeah. It's not just the special effect. I think that would be the big takeaway. And then getting interaction from the audience. I can say, during the pandemic, do you feel like an ostrich and you want to bury your head? Or do you feel like a peacock and you want to make yourself big? Just post in the chat, O or P. And then people start interacting, and, it's fun. Sometimes I feel like both. And there's all kinds of tricks and ways to do it. And I can even play music at the end of my talk. Yes. So Stephen, you need to go out into the world and teach people how to have emotional value. So there's lots of ways we can pull people in a virtual environment.
And I thought I was fancy with my, videos I would put in the background and learning how to close my camera so I didn't have to be active. I think you've got me beat.
Well, it's some software called Ecamm for anyone who's interested in exploring that.
Yeah, and it's funny, John, and funny, I mean, in an enlightening and interesting way, not haha. When I saw the butterflies, can I pick a different animal, or was that in the software?
I hired someone who did all that for me.
Okay.
I don't ask me any technical questions, but from a mindset, I can answer this. I got introduced to this technology, and then I realized, I have to make a decision. Do I want to be Blockbuster or do I want to be Netflix? No one's asking me to do special effects in my virtual talks.
Yeah.
But the fact that I knew it was possible and would make it better for the audience caused me to invest time and money and training with an expert who could show me how to do all that. So the now comes across effortlessly.
It works, yeah.
But that's just how, as entrepreneurs, we have to think of ourselves of, okay, if I never heard of it and I didn't do it, that's one thing. But if I wait until somebody asks me if I can do it and I haven't done it, then that's on me.
Right. It's very cool. What I thought of, just a quick story, because I've done a lot on leadership training and I love the education. And I have a slide around different groups of animals. And a group of, crow is a murder, a rhinoceros is a crash. And I put up an eagle and I say, as a leader, we want to be an eagle. We want to fly. We want to point and target. A group of eagles. You would never see a group or flock of eagles, not a flock of seagulls. A group of eagles is called a convocation. And the word convocation is a group of people brought together for a special purpose. So when I saw your butterflies and your analogy of flying together, I thought, wow, I want it to be a flock of eagles, group of people for a like that's what leadership is and wants to be. I just interviewed Bill Reichart the other day from Garage Technology Ventures. He's got a new book out called Wow, and The Perfect Pitch. And it was interesting. His 3 C's were similar to yours. And so I want to talk about that for a minute, because I like sort of tactical things that we can share.
Yes. And
you've got a 3C about building a story. And again, at the end of the day, a lot of these things sort of, convolute together, which I think is cool. The more you read, the more you dissect. But share with me, if you would, the 3 C's, because I think it's something easy for people to build on.
Well, it's a little checklist for whether it's your elevator pitch, which I call an elevator story, or a case story. Is it clear? Because the confused mind always says no. Is it concise? And is it compelling? And the compelling part comes from the emotion in the storytelling.
And so that's what I was going to ask you, because clear to me, just like my little bullseye over my shoulder here, the top ring of the bullseye was, what's the emotional value of what you do? So you put the compelling emotion part at the bottom. How do you distinguish
I say it in that order
and compelling?
Yeah, it's not that one is more important than the other. It's just I put it in the order of a soundbite for being on TV, so that people can remember it.
Got it. And it does flow better that way. The way you do it, it stacks very well.
Yes. But clarity, sometimes it's just as simple as don't use acronyms. Don't try to impress people with how smart you are. Pretend if, Einstein said, if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it at all. So some people are so afraid to, use a word that's more conversational than impressive. And I'm all about because people aren't going to tell you they're confused or they don't know what that word means. Yeah. So it's up to us to be really clear and concise. Also, the big mistake people make in a story is thinking it has to go on and on. And if you have that structure I just gave of exposition, etc., then you know where the story's going and you know how to keep people involved and on the edge of their seats. And then, of course, emotion is, what are the stakes? The higher the stakes in the story, the better the story.
So let's take a look at that. Let's see if you can break it down in an element layer below. Clear. What are 2 or 3 elements that somebody should look at to say, this is how I make something clear?
Say it to a 5th grader and see if they understand you, literally. Okay. Say it to somebody who doesn't know anything about you or your business and see if they understand you. And just look for words that have more than 3 syllables and say, is there a simpler way to say this? Do I need to say pejorative? Do I need to say the little girl stood at the edge of the high dive with a lot of trepidation? Or can I just say she stood there trembling with fear?
Right. Okay. Concise.
Concise. It is, when someone says, hey, what do you do? It is not a 10-minute invitation for a monologue. The whole goal is to intrigue people enough to say, wow, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
And that's how you know you've gotten. And there's meetings after the meetings. Like if you pitch, like when I pitch myself to be a speaker with other speakers, then everyone who's interviewed us, they have another second meeting. If I've told a story that they can repeat, then I am concise enough in my storytelling that they can remember it and repeat it.
All right. And then wrapping up so we keep ourselves on time, compelling. What are the elements for compelling?
Words that describe emotions that your client is struggling with. Using the word struggle is an example. of, oh, somebody's struggling with something. Putting them out of their waiting misery is another descriptive way to get people emotionally. If you've ever waited for somebody you love to come out of surgery, then you're really emotionally engaged in the story. And odds are, even if you haven't, you know somebody who had to do that.
Perfect. And for somebody to get in touch with you, what's the easiest way? I know I get your emails. You do an amazing job too on the emails, by the way. So
Thank
I'm excited on the video animation, but your emails are great
you.
also.
Thank you. Well, I have a gift for everybody. If you text this word to PIT 66866, take out your phone and text that number. And in the message, type the word pitch with a P, P-I-T-C-H. So just put in the number 66866 and I send you a free PDF of my storytelling tips. And you can Google me, johnlivesay.com, or if you can't remember any of that, just Google the Pitch Whisperer and all my
Perfect.
content comes up.
I love it. All right, John. Well, stay safe in Austin. Thanks for taking the time, and we'll have to catch up soon off camera and share stories and go from there.
Thanks so much for having me, Stephen.
All right. Thanks so much.